Everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I, Shumata Lugda, on behalf of Friends for Future, welcome you all. We have with us Dr. Ali from the Central Committee and the founder of the organization. Our speaker for today is Ms. Akanksha Marwa, Assistant Professor, Delhi Metropolitan Education, Noida. She has research experience and publications in areas pertaining to overcriminalization, freedom of dietary habits, reformation of offenders, restorative justice, marital rape, cyberbullying, artificial intelligence, and mob lynching. She has also presented papers on artificial intelligence, freedom of speech and expression, space law and privatization of the space sectors, CSR, that is corporate social responsibility, and sexual harassment at the workplace, and acid attacks in various national and international conferences. Welcome, Ms. Marwa. And a small announcement for all the participants, you can keep posting your questions in the chat box. We'll take up all the questions at the end of the lecture. Thank you. Ms. Marwa, please.
Thank you, Shuma. Thank you, Dr. Ali, for having me here. And first of all, I must say that I'm very excited and I'm equally nervous to be here. And thank you for the introduction. I think I can just start with the topic. So, all right. By the time I'm sharing my screen, I'll just add to what Shuma has already given about me. I have been researching on the topic of restorative justice, which I have particularly picked up for today, from past 1 year. And in this past 1 year, I have been so much affected by how restorative justice works, how or what intention it has to transform the system, transform the lives, transform the things around us, that I try to look at even the minutest problem from the perspective of restorative justice. And when I was invited to share my thoughts on environmental justice, environmental law, I decided to look at this problem, the problem of the environmental damage or wrongs or crimes from restorative justice perspective only. Now, my aim here is not to give a formal lecture, but I would try to be more into the discussion part of the frame. So I would try to give you as much as food as possible for me for thought to think how we can transform the environmental justice, environmental law and practice using the approach of restorative justice, the philosophy of restorative justice. As far as the objectives, my objectives for this session and the outcomes I'm expecting for this session, I'll be talking about what is restorative justice and how we can look at environmental law from the lens of restorative justice. Then I have tried to collate a few examples, a few cases where restorative justice ideology was used to resolve the environmental law problem, the environmental wrongs problem, and a few legislations or executive actions that have been taken up in other countries, just to put forth the idea that yes, there are jurisdictions in the world who are moving forward towards the restorative justice ideology. And then how restorative justice or restorative environmental justice thinks of justice delivery and has to propose for the wholesome justice, and a few suggestions that I have think could be incorporated in the formal justice system to make it better for all the stakeholders involved. So first of all, what is restorative justice? Dr. Theo Gabrielides, he is the founder of Restorative Justice for All. It is an organization that works in the United Kingdom. He has defined restorative justice as an ethos with practical goals. Now, why practical goals? Because it thinks about the problem and thinks about the solutions that can work to make that problem go and not just suppress it like the formal justice system does. So I'll talk about why I am distinguishing from the formal justice system. Then one of the essential characteristic is it includes all the affected parties. That means the victims, the community which is affected, and yes, the offenders. They are directly or indirectly involved in an encounter where they try to talk about the problem that has arisen, and through that process of understanding each other's perspective, they try to put forth the solution. Now, why there is direct and indirect encounter both? Because restorative justice is essentially voluntary. If victim does not feel safe to enter into dialogue with the offender, there can be a proxy which can be appointed, or there can be a surrogate victim which can be sent to the dialogue, so that the offender knows the idea, offender knows the emotions and feelings of the victim, and at the same time, if victim is not ready to be a part of dialogue, he is not forced to do so. So there can be a direct encounter between the victim and the offender, and there can be an indirect encounter as well. Another way in which the basic principles on the use of restorative justice programs in criminal matters, they define restorative justice program as any process. Now, when we say any process, it means we have broadened the ambit of how restorative justice system works. It can be incorporated in any system, in any country, whichever way it wants, whichever way it thinks it is suitable to its own system. So it can be any process where essentially the victim, offender, and wherever appropriate, the community which is affected, they are involved to discuss how they were affected by the crime and what are these solutions that they can offer. There can be various ways in which this can be done. So there can be mediation, conciliation, conferencing, sentencing circles, dialogues. So there are a number of terms which are used in different countries for such restorative justice processes. Now, when I have explained what restorative justice is, there are three essentials, three pillars that are there in the system. First is that there is a focus on harms and needs. So harm is how that act or omission of wrong has affected the victim, and not just the victim, but also the offender. So not only in environmental law, but in other cases as well, where there are traditional crimes like murders or theft, what is it that motivated the offender, the responsible party, to commit that act, that wrongful act? So there could be some effect on the part of offender also, the reason because of which we are now moving towards rehabilitation, since no one is a born criminal, as we often say. So first is harms and needs, harms that have been done to all the stakeholders. Then out of those harms, what are the needs that have arisen and how to address those needs. Then second pillar is accountability. So through this process of exchanging of emotions or feelings on harms and needs, there is a genuine motivation that comes up in the responsible party to take the accountability of what he has done. And because there is accountability voluntarily taken up by the offender, there is a genuine apology, genuine remorse that is tendered. And lastly, the third pillar is participation. Restorative justice system facilitates the participation of all the stakeholders who have been in any which way they are affected by the crime. And hence, there are multiple benefits for all these stakeholders in the process. Now, when we say that it is used in criminal matters, one thing that in law school we learn is that there is a difference between civil wrongs and criminal wrongs. In civil wrongs, there is a right in personam which is affected. Like one person has affected other person's right. Let's say there is a contract between A and B, and A breaches the contract. So injury is done to only B. But if there is a crime which has taken place, then even if it is committed to one person, the entire community is under threat. That if the person, the perpetrator, is not punished, he may injure other parties as well, other persons as well. There is a slight difference here in how restorative justice thinks, that it thinks that victim is the primary party and therefore it is the victim who should get attention. But I say that yes, it is the victim, but it is also the community. So in the criminal matters, victims, offenders, and yes, the community is also there, which is affected. And what are the benefits that restorative justice process has? For the victims, the most important thing is the involvement in the process. Now, the former criminal justice system is often criticized on this point, that it does not take care of the needs of the victims. That state takes the property, takes the right that victim has in the entire event and starts the prosecution. So it is state against the criminal. So here in restorative justice process, that taking over of the state, of the property in the conflict that has arisen is disregarded. And the victim is directly involved in the process. Yes, of course, if he is willing to face the offender, to talk about the ways in which he has been hurt and what he expects out of the process, what he expects as justice from the authorities who claim that they are there to render justice, maybe the court, the legislature, or the state altogether. Then because they are involved in the process, people are able to hear what are their agonies, what is their injury, what the ways in which they have been affected. So there is a lending of ears to the cries of victims. And also it facilitates their closure and their healing at the end, since they are able to take out all the feelings that is affecting them psychologically. So whenever any crime is committed, it is not only the physical injury, it is also the mental, psychological, financial, and all the other types of injuries which are involved. And in fact, in many cases, it has been seen that when offenders hear what their acts have done to the victim, they render a genuine apology. And this apology, maybe it is a word just like sorry or I would not repeat, it actually affects the victim. So because I'm researching on restorative justice system, I have come across various meetings where people share how they have been affected. So I'll just give an example here. I came across a woman. She has been in touch with me. I'll not name her. So her brother was killed 26 years ago. And with the help of some facilitators, she entered into the RJ circles, restorative justice circles. And with those circles, it was, yes, of course, difficult for her because she had just lost her brother. But in those meetings, when she could listen to what offender had to say, she was able to understand that, yes, there was some reason this happened. And she was able to forgive, as opposed to the other family members who still are not able to forgive and they are still in pain. And when we say healing, healing is not when you forget about the event that has hurt you. Healing is also when you are not, when the event that has hurt you does not have any control over you. So with the process, when you are involved as a victim and you are able to put forth how you felt, how you were affected, that control that event has over you is also released. And you are able to face it in the eyes and say that I am over it. This has happened, but this was in the past. And hence, there are satisfactory results that this process offers, because the victim is now able to move forth that one event that has affected him. And then for offenders, they are able to take the responsibility, accountability, and then when it comes from within, it leads to a transformation. And that transformation is very helpful in reducing the recidivism, repetition of that crime, the reoffending rate. And in many jurisdictions, I've seen that yes, there is a reduction in the repetition. Otherwise, the punitive form of justice that we offer today in the formal justice system, that is a very mechanical approach. Event, then there is trial, judgment, and punishment. there is a problem of recidivism in that case. So when there is an honest transformation out of realizing that yes, what you did was wrong, there is lesser chance of repeating that wrong. And then finally, for the community, there is involvement. When we say that crime is against the community, then community must have a say to talk about how it was affected. And most importantly, there is a trust building. Community knows that yes, law is doing something to make sure that person who offended is not going to repeat it. The person who has offended is going to do something to make it correct. And then there are various ways in which it can be corrected. So there is also community support to the offenders. In traditional crimes, when a person is incarcerated, he is sent to jail. When he comes back, he is ostracized. He is not accepted to be a part of community. But when there is community support, there is acceptance that yes, the person has transformed. And the way restorative justice deals with it is in that case remarkable. And then finally, there is social justice in a combination of all of these benefits that restorative justice offers. The social justice, like we have in an Indian constitution, it is more of associational justice, that one person feels or has a duty, or when he has a right, he has a duty towards other as well. So when three stakeholders together, they are able to resolve the conflict, to find a solution, they are trying to associate with each other, to support each other. Hence, a more meaningful form of social justice comes up. There are various ways in restorative justice system can be incorporated. There can be an integrated system, which can be adopted at any stage in the formal justice system. Then there can be alternative adoption, which means the formal justice system would be disregarded, would be excluded, and in that place, restorative justice system would be placed. And then additionally, it is more in the post-sentencing stage, so that when the formal justice system has established the guilt, at post-sentencing, when he is serving some kind of sentence, he is able to understand that what you did was wrong, how it has affected, and what you can do to not repeat it in future. Alternatively, the models can also be explained as front-end model and back-end model. The front-end model is before prosecution, before even the responsible party is taken to the court and the trial begins. So at that stage only, the problem can be addressed, a dialogue can be facilitated with the help of a facilitator, and in back end, it is post-sentencing again. So after the guilt has been established, as a form of your sentencing, during the time you are serving, during the time you are asked to pay, let's say, the compensation in the environment matter, or you are restoring the environment, the nature that you have harmed, you are asked to meet the victims to see how their feelings were hurt. And then between those two stages, the front end and the back end, there is post-charge, but during the trial and before the conviction is announced, and then after the conviction is announced, but before the sentencing is done. Just so that once the guilt has been established, before deciding your sentence, you are allowed to see if you understand, if you take the responsibility, so that your sentence can be adjusted. So there is New South Wales, where we have legislations like this, that if a person takes up the responsibility, his sentence can be changed accordingly. And one thing that I can, as per my research, I can mention here, that people generally prefer the back end model. Why? Because in front end model, there are chances that the responsible party is going to take advantage of the provision. They may fake the genuine apology that is expected out of them, and then there will not be the transformation. But if it is back end, it is ensured that the guilt is established, they are punished, but there are also efforts on the part of state or court to ensure that they understand the gravity of their acts. So coming to how we can use this idea, this philosophy of restorative justice in environmental matters. Now, I believe since this is fourth lecture, I would not deal much with the terms like the intergenerational and intergenerational equity or anthropocentric approach or biocentric or ecocentric. But what is relevant for us is to understand that the way environment behaves with us, like there is E.O. Wilson, the biologist, who says that humans have a very innate relationship with the nature, the way they care about the nature. And I have a few examples here as well. There is Maori tradition, which is there in New Zealand, where people worship rivers. They say that they are their ancestors. And there is a saying which goes that I am the river and the river is me. And the river belongs to us just as we belong to the river. And even I just talk about India, we worship air, water, soil, trees, and many other elements in the nature. In fact, it is said that our body, the human body, is made of the 5 elements, which is Akash, the sky or the space, Vayu, which is wind, air, then Agni, which is fire, Jal, which is water, and Prithvi, which is earth or soil. So the way our body is constructed is the same as the nature is constructed. And hence we have a very unique relationship with nature. So when we are so much connected with environment, why not connect with the environmental justice as a community, as a coordinated approach? And when we talk about justice, we also have to ensure that there is a sustainability in the justice. We say that there is sustainable development, which means for the present generation, whenever it is developing, it is taking any activity, it has to take care of the future generation as well. So when we are thinking of rendering justice, whenever any environmental wrong has been committed, why not to ensure that the justice which is given is going to be long drawn? It is going to be for the times to come. And punitive justice that we have today, that is only equating punishment with justice, and that once the offender is punished, justice is done. This is not going to exist for a long time. And therefore, we also have to think about sustainability of justice for a longer period of time. And this sustainability of justice is provided by the restorative justice system. Since there is an understanding of the harm and there is a proposal to ensure that the harm is redressed. So the gravity of the environmental damage, we have seen, I think 2019 was marked as the hottest year ever witnessed by the human generation. The impact of environmental damage, they are long drawn and they are long lasting. If something is committed today, our generations to come will have to face it. And so much grave it is that even ecocide, which is killing of the ecology, it is proposed to be included as 5th crime against humanity in the Rome Statute. Because of the gravity of the situation and the way it affects the entire community, there was an approach to read environmental wrongs from the criminological perspective, to apply the criminological principles to understanding of environmental law and redress the harm, to make the punishment more stringent, like we generally believe that if strongest are the punishments, the lesser would be the crime. However, sadly, it does not work. So we have a criminological perspective to look at the environmental wrongs, environmental crimes, and now ecocide. So how are we going to look at it? When we say that entire criminal justice system is evolving, because we're now moving from retributive to deterrent to rehabilitative, reformative, and now restorative. So now the criminal justice system is evolving. We have to see how it can be taken up to address the environmental wrongs. And thus, when we apply the restorative justice principles to environmental law and practice, what we can say is that it makes the techniques of redressing the environmental wrongs very emotionally intelligent, very sensitive to the activities that they are done. In today's world, we have lived in an Anthropocenic era where people, the humans have taken over a lot of control over how nature should adhere to their demands, to their requirements. And therefore, there has been anthropogenic activities degrading the environment today. So what restorative justice does is, it disregards that domination of humans over the nature, over the environment. And it tries to change how we look at the needs that we have to fulfill from the environment, to balance the nature, the needs of the nature and the needs of the humans, to help make you such choices that are environmental friendly. And as a matter of fact, the business houses today are, yes, they are very concerned of what image they have in the society. If they are more environmental friendly, they even use it as their brand value. Their brand value increases that they are respecting the needs of the mother nature. So how it works, it is participatory, as I was already explained, one of the most distinguished feature of restorative justice system. It listens to the affected parties. Now in environmental cases, who are the affected parties? It is a very crucial question to determine. Why? Because we all are the beneficiaries of the environment, living, non-living, humans, non-humans, present generation, future generation, all of us are going to be the affected parties. So which are the parties you want to include? Then it works as a transformative justice system, that is taking up the problem and redressing it. And hence it becomes a social movement and not just a system of justice. I tried to draw the three pillars of restorative justice that I discussed in the previous slides from the angle of environmental law. So for the harms and obligations and the needs, there is a need to identify that who are the victims who are really hurt, who are the victims who have been affected. Then along with those primary victims, who or what is the community which is affected, so as to ensure that it is included in the process. Then who has to be given the right to speak for humans and non-humans and present generations and future generations. Then for the part of accountability, it has to be seen that whose accountability is there. Are there any primary responsible parties and secondary responsible parties? And once you have identified, how are you going to impose accountability? What is the nature of accountability that has to be imposed? And lastly, participation, again related to who are the parties, how to allow them, at what stage you want to allow them. As far as the needs are concerned, I have listed a few parties which are harmed, which can be identified. So for example, there is indigenous community, the tribal areas, the Aboriginal people who worship or who try to retain the environment the way it is. They do not want any outside interference within their communities. So development ends up taking the land that they revere for their generations, and they keep on expecting to revere there for their generations to come. Then people whose lives or whose properties are directly affected. So let's say there was a flood which has affected a particular community. So their houses have flooded, their properties, their factories or their offices have flooded. Then people whose amenity, just like property and life, they are affected, or the residents of one area. So if there was a Bhopal tragedy case and the people there are affected, they are still facing certain health problems. So that could be an affected community. It is the entire community. And many a times, victims and community, they coincide in the cases of environmental law. Because it is not just one person which is affected, like in the traditional crimes, but the entire, the bulk of people who are affected. And their needs that have arisen is first of all to ensure that this act would not be repeated. So Bhopal gas tragedy or Shriram gas tragedy in Delhi, it is not going to be repeated. The companies are going to be more responsible in how they function, how they take care of the property which is there, the things which are there in their properties. Then they may want the offender to visit the places that have been destroyed. Then paying the expenses for what losses they have suffered, compensating them, and yes, restoring the environment as much as possible. As much as possible, the environment has to be restored. Then for the accountability, there is generally a question that if companies are the first parties, the first responsible party, is it that their employees are secondary parties? So that depends upon case to case basis. How it can be imposed? Yes, since it is restorative justice, there would be facilitation of dialogue, meeting between the victims and the community on one hand and the responsible party on the other hand, to ensure that there is complete information from the horse's mouth, say. And then once it is understood that it has been affected, once they take up the accountability, there are various options that they can offer to act responsibly, to give back to the community. For example, there can be apologies, written apologies, public apologies, before the entire public, that yes, what we did was wrong, and next time it won't be repeated. There would not be any next time. We'll be more sensitive to the environment, to the needs. Then there are donations which are made for the funds which are created to do some public service there, community service there, for reconstructing what has been damaged, educating the public, publications in newspaper about sensitizing people that this activity is harmful, please refrain. The commitments to prevent future harms, undertaking of work, creation of funds and remedial plans. Then the participation. Again, once the parties have been identified, how to include them at what stage. This again depends upon which stage a country wants to adopt for implementing the restorative justice system. So it can go for pre-trial if it wants. It can go for post-trial, during the trial but before conviction. It can go for after conviction but before sentencing, or it can go even after sentencing. And for the future generation, the participation can be sought by proxy. So there can be NGOs, social activists, environmental experts who can represent what impact the particular act can have on the future generation. So as I mentioned in the objectives, I've included a few case studies here where the restorative justice processes were involved. So the first was Minamata disease case in Japan. It was in 1970 when there was a company named as Chisso Private Limited. So this company deliberately released mercury in the water bodies, because of which the fishes in that water body, they were deceased. And the people who consumed those fishes, they contracted the Minamata disease. It is from the mercury which was there in the water bodies and the water animals. So it did not just affect the people who consumed it, but at that time, whoever was pregnant, those women also, they had miscarriages, and their children, they still had those diseases from the mercury. So people who lost their family members, who lost their future with a healthy life, they wanted to meet the directors and the president of the company. There was a lot of hue and cry, and the meeting was arranged between the victims, the community which was affected, and the president. And people actually demonstrated how they were affected. That if the president can now bring back their family members or can secure a healthy life. And the president was so much affected that there and then he felt so emotional that he apologized for what he did. So restorative justice, even though it was not that prevalent at that time in Japan, it was conducted and there was an apology by the president of the company. Then in New South Wales, there was this case of Garrett versus Williams, where there was destruction of the Aboriginal artifacts because of the acts of the Pinnacle Mines. There was conferencing, restorative justice conferencing, which was done. And It was effective because it led to the payment of expenses by the responsible party to the plaintiffs, to the victims. And there was also facilitator's cost, which was given, and even a trust was established to create a fund for recovering the loss that was done to the Aboriginal artifacts. In another case, recently in 2018 in New South Wales again, there was destruction of an Aboriginal tree. In this case also, there was a lot of donation which was made out of the genuine transformation of the responsible parties because of the facilitation that was ensured between the victims and the responsible parties. And in the last case, Canterbury Regional Council versus Interflow, in New Zealand, there was again a lot of donation that was given to clean the stream of water that was polluted because of the offense of the company. It was again because of the restorative justice process that was held between the victims and the responsible parties. And there are many other cases as well where proxy was allowed, where donation was in fact even more than what court could have allowed. So when we read statutes, we see that there is amount of penalty which is mentioned. So there is a limit to which courts can allow compensation. The benefit, one of the biggest benefit of restorative justice in this case is that when companies realize, or when the responsible parties realize that they did something wrong, they want to do even more than what law could have asked them. Law could only ask them to give compensation. But along with compensation, they are ready to do the education work. They are ready to sensitize people for not repeating this act. They are able to start their corporate social responsibility in this direction. They are able to dedicate a specific fund for that community which has been affected. Country-wise, a few data that I have collected. So in Canada, there is Community Environmental Justice Forum. There is in Australia, Special Acts. In New South Wales, there is Crimes Sentencing Procedure Act of 1999. Then there are authorities for environmental protection, which facilitate restorative justice processes. And this is section 21A of this act that I was mentioning, that if during the process, during the sentencing part, the offender shows remorse, then it could be used as a mitigating factor to reduce the penalty and allow the responsible party to restore in whichever way it wants. Then there is another act in New Zealand, which is New Zealand Sentencing Act of 2002, where the outcomes of restorative justice processes can be taken into consideration in the sentencing part. Then they are asked to facilitate to encourage the victims and the offenders to go for restorative justice system. In Germany, there is an NGO by the name of Wage Hanover, which facilitates restorative justice in different fields. And in 2014, there was a British Enforcement and Sanction Guidance, which tries to which has introduced restoration notice in various environmental matters. Now coming to India, again, I have not given it in detail, I just mentioned the sections, that the approach, if we go legislation-wise, it is still punitive. Although, thankfully, judiciary has been very active. They have considered various environmental law principles for rendering justice, for motivating environmental impact assessment, environmental audits, and so on, to ensure that the anthropocentric activities they are conducted while taking care of the needs of the environment and the people who could be affected. I'll come to this is the last part of my discourse where I've included a few suggestions that if a country goes on to include the restorative justice, environmental justice in its justice system, what can be done? So the first thing is to identify that who are all the stakeholders, who are all the victims. So ideally, it is a very large category since we have a common heritage in the environment and we all are the beneficiaries, but you'll have to restrict it in particular matters. So that can be decided from case to case basis. Rationally restrict it to limit and to make sure that restorative justice process is conducted in a very apt manner. Then offenders, company, the accomplice can be include workers or consumers because of whom the company is indulging in such activities. Then what are the harms that have to be addressed? Tangible, intangible, the feelings and emotions, like in the spread of Minamata disease, there was a terror, the health which was also affected. The psychological harm was also there. So what is the ambit of harm and how much it has to be enlarged? Then in the processes, there must be an inclusion of experts, the NGOs who are working in this direction, the activists, doctors, toxicologists, biologists, holists, economists, ecologists, all of them should have a say in the matter. Then identify which stage at which it has to be included, so as to give maximum results, maximum satisfactory results. Then in what way maximum restoration, reparation, and restitution can be made. Then we have to work on the concepts like environmental mediation. Now, mediation is a very loose term to use. Many say that in criminal matters, mediation is not a right word because victims and offenders are not at the same level. And therefore, many countries, instead of mediation, they are using the terms like conferencing, dialogues, or circles. So in what ways the stakeholders can be made to sit together and address the harms, needs, accountability, and solutions. So focus should be on large group dialogues to ensure that all the ideas, all the perspectives can be taken into account. Then what are the measures that can be included? So there are a few things that I've already mentioned in the accountability part, but remediating the environmental harm, promoting the environmental audit and health ed audit for what impact it can have, any activity can have on the people in general, what impact it can have on the environment. Then including the local people, including the experts while deciding what activities are allowed. So to conclude, I would say that until and unless we do something actively in this direction, we are moving towards the age of killing the planet Earth and the world of climate emergency, the terms that have been devised, not by me. But yes, I remember I read it somewhere, Stephen Hawking saying that humans would need to move to another planet because planet Earth would be no more sustainable. So I would say that if we have to move, then it would be by choice and not by necessity. So while preserving the planet Earth, by enriching it with what it was and what we think for the future, we have to balance our needs with what we have to give. Then restorative justice, using it, it would create a social capital where people are associated with each other. And since environment is one area where borderlessness is a myth, one thing that we have to do is think global. We have to think about what activities of ours can affect another jurisdiction. So acting locally, but thinking globally. And this restorative justice is a combination of positive law and natural law. So we are talking about our duties that have been imposed upon us for the very members of this community, but it can be also introduced through the black letter laws of the positive law, through the sanctions that can be imposed. Then instead of institutionalization, we need to understand, we need to identify what wholesome justice is for the victims, for the offenders, and for the community. And hence developing cooperative and participatory strategies. So that is it from my side. I conclude by quoting what Fania Davis said, that we are so good at causing harm, but it is now the time for us to become the healers for the community, for the environment, for the generations to come. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can also write an email to me at this address. And thank you again, Shuma and Dr. Ali, for letting me share. That is it.
Thank you so much, Akanksha, for such a wonderful lecture. It was full of informations. There's one question for you in the chat box, if you can see.
I'll just,
yeah.
Okay, so it says, my question is how you identify and choose who should represent the environmental natural resources that have been harmed or affected. For example, river or mangrove, who fills that empty chair? And identify and choose. All right. So I think I took up this part a little bit in the PPTs also, that the non-humans or those who cannot speak for themselves, they yes would need certain representatives. So for them, it could be the indigenous community which reveres that particular natural resource. It could be an NGO which works for that. It could be a social activist. Like there is one name which is very prevalent in India in the environmental law, M.N. Mehta, if I'm not taking the name wrong. So he is one of the leading environmentalists. He has taken up so many cases. And in fact, if we look at the case studies that we have in India, I have taken up my LLB from Delhi University. And there we are given case materials in which all the leading cases are written. So maximum, like 50%, 60% of the cases are M.N. Mehta versus Union of India. So he has taken up this task to to take care of those who cannot speak for themselves, like the children who are there in the forced employment. So to answer this, I can say that those who are environmental experts, the NGOs, the social activists, or those who possess those, who revere those resources. Since environment belongs to everyone, everyone must have a right to speak. I hope that answers, Nicholas.
I have a question for you, Akanksha.
Yes, Shuma.
Can we say the CSR is a form of restorative justice, whereby first we cause some harm, and then we give these companies, they give a percentage of their profit for some CSR activities. So how is that in any way? Don't you think that it's actually legalizing the illegal work, because first we're exploiting everything, and out of that profit we are giving a percentage as a CSR. So you are legalizing something which is not legal. So I think CSR.
Okay, I got the question. See, one thing is, I in fact only gave an example that it can be included. In fact, it is, if we read the Companies Act of 2013, in the schedule, I do not remember the name or number of the schedule, but there are certain activities that companies can take up to dedicate certain part of their profits, of their turnover, in certain activities. So per se, it would not be legalizing something which is illegal. Corporate social responsibility, in a sense, it is a responsibility towards the society. It could be for gender education, the equality in the society. It could be for environment. It could be for supporting the education of weaker sections, the below poverty line sections, or it could be adopting a village and working towards its development. It could be introducing technology in that village. It could be anything. So per se, it is not legalizing what is illegal. It is only a form of the responsibility that you have towards basically giving back to the community. Since companies, they run from the activities they conduct in the society, they are earning from whatever resources we use of that company. So they have a duty to give back. But when I say that it can be included to promote the environmental interest, I'm not saying it in the form of that they are hurting the environment, so therefore they should give. No, if they are hurting the environment, it is not responsibility, it is a penalty upon them. They should do it. If they are hurting, then is mandatory for those companies to recover that. But as an excuse, it cannot be used that if they are hurting environment, they are doing something in their CSRs. So that cannot be taken up as an excuse, but yes, as a responsibility, it should be even more indulged into so as to promote the environmental justice altogether.
Thank you. One more question.
Definitely.
As we know, like small island countries, they are dying because of the rise in sea level. This is known to all. Now, how do we establish the liability in case of companies like Bhopal Gas Tragedy? We know that there is a company and that something happened, and because of this company, everyone is suffering. But for the small island countries, how do we establish this liability? How do we identify that who is responsible for this? Because without identifying who is responsible, how would you file a complaint? Against whom will go? I mean, they are not seen, they are unknown enemies. How do we identify those unknown enemies? That's my question.
So that's a very valid question, because like I said, environmental law, or let's say technologies, cyberspace, they are areas where borderlessness is a myth. You do not know which country's activity is affecting your country. We do not know that. So in that case, a very holistic approach is required, where let's say UN, there are agencies which take care of environmental matters. So they may come up, and then the focus should not be on the identification only. There are countries there are companies who do certain works even without knowing who is wrong, because along with the identification of who committed the wrong, it is also important to address that wrong, to rectify that wrong. So by the time it is identified, the focus should also be to recover what has been done. So the countries who maybe call them world leaders or agencies of UN, which are working for the benefit of entire globe, they can come up and look after how these islands and small countries who do not have equitable say like other big countries, how they can be taken care of.
Akansha, I think we lost Shama somehow. So I was also thinking like, okay, when comes to the point like we want to set the responsibility on, I suppose we talk about greenhouse gases or carbon dioxide emissions, and then we say, okay, we can set the penalty for the people who are currently, or the countries who are currently doing the highest emission. Like then there's the China, India, comes Brazil, and so all these developing nations. But then their always logic is, okay, we are currently doing, but all that damage that has been done, basically done by the developed countries, they are able to set their things right. And when our time is to develop and to, to build up our economies, and there comes this cutting down of greenhouse gases emission. So how this can be, like this debate can be fixed in the terms of, because in general it's affecting everyone, but economically it's affecting the people who are doing it, like who has to cut down the greenhouse gases now, and also the industrialization and stuff like that.
See, I think in these cases, more than blaming what has been done, and we should avoid saying that, okay, now it's our turn, you cannot excuse us, you cannot blame us, look out, talk to the countries who have done it earlier. So I think at this point in time, we are not in a position to say so. What has been done cannot be changed, but what stands ahead of us has to be taken care of. Of course, there are countries who are developed. They are equally responsible, maybe because they directed their manufacturing industries to developing countries. And at that time, maybe 2-3 decades back, developing countries readily accepted the offers because they were generating employment there. They were generating income for the people there. But right now, we have to take care. We have to think about a more coordinated efforts. So what has been done cannot be changed, but what is going to come can definitely be changed. So at the global level, these countries may be asked to sit together and to think of what can be done to not repeat those activities that have already impacted the environment. So the leaders, the responsible authorities, or the appropriate authorities would be the right word. So whoever is the appropriate authority in that country, they can represent their countries at an international forum. They can talk about what and how their activities can be changed, and maybe in this manner they may ask the developed country to support or to provide with the technology that would be environmental friendly. How developed countries are conducting their activities, they would have certain technology which is environmental friendly, which is not producing that much that much pollution like it, because developing countries, they still used the old technologies which still produce pollution. So they may be supported that way. So for example, in outer space or matters, there are international instruments that say that those countries which have technology, they have to support the smaller countries which do not have technology. Like let's say India, it launches satellites for other countries as well. So it is supporting them for their telecommunications, for education. So similarly, in the international forum, we can talk about what technologies developed countries can support developing countries to replace those technologies with more eco-friendly things. Because at the end of the day, the impact is going to be felt by every country. So if India is doing something harmful, after 2 years, maybe US could feel it. Right?
So yeah. What also can be done, like because the developed countries are also not willing always to do the technology transfer. They always want to sell their things, like if comes the renewable source of energy. We saw that during last 15-20 years that were the prices for the solar so higher that they still were not, because in Europe, if I see, the German is one of the leading brand in solar panels. The China is producing something cheaper, but still the German companies are doing, but they're still not willing to train or the technology transfer to the poorer nations who can basically benefit a lot from this. So this can also be, so there is always a hesitation, like for this technology transfer. Another interesting thing can be like, do you see that there in those international forums, like the Paris conference or something like that, this climate, is there some negotiation or is there some conferences between the effective parties and the nation problems, like some sort of like as we're talking about restorative justice, there can be the conference or the circles where the people are talking about, like the nations, like we see that South Asian nation is the 2 or 3 nations are the top 7 or 8 nations who will be affected by climate change. So they can be sitting together with the developed countries who caused the major damage in the previous decades. So talking like some kind of see that they are the victims, what they are facing currently. So some kind of, direct talks. I do not know if something is happening like that also.
Okay, for the first part of your question, yes, monetary consideration is a very big thing. Every country is trying to raise up the economy, but that depends upon how you pitch the idea of coordinated efforts and collaborations between the country. There are many areas in which collaborations do happen. So how you are going to propose the idea that environmental justice is not limited to one country, the effects are for everybody. So how you are going to pitch and how you are going to invite collaboration, it depends upon the country's approach. But then again, agencies like UN agencies can definitely promote this collaboration because it has to take care of the needs of all the nations. Then for the second part of it, internationally, I have not seen such dialogues. I do not know about such dialogues happening, but with the increasing importance, like within the countries, there are dialogues happening within 2 or more nations, the treaties or the other agreements happening. I think it would be like in the coming future, it would be an option. It could be taken up by the countries, given the importance that environmental holds for every one of us.
Yep, thank you so much. It was great. I think if still we have any question, I think we do not see any question in the chat. And yeah, we thank you all the participants and for your the questions and also your active participation in this session. And I'm so happy and thankful to Akansha Marva also that she spared her time and gave this wonderful talk. For me, it was very because it's always for a scientist or from a biodiversity or biologist person, basically this social aspects is really unique. So it's always learns a lot. So I wrote a lot, like half of your talk, I had to write 2-3 pages. I do not know so many of those things. Thank you so much for personally, for me, it was very insightful, a lot of learning. And I hope we can continue this journey together. And I thank all the participants again. And I think unfortunately we lost Shoma, basically, who is basically the organizer of these talks. And I would also like to thank for her continuous hard work to organize and arrange for the speakers. And I think that was all for today. And hopefully we'll meet soon for our next session and sometime next month. Thank you again, Akansha. And
thank you so much, Dr. Ali. I think I hope I was able to do justice to what I wanted to share with all of you. I have dropped my email ID in the chat box. If anyone wants to share the thoughts or any questions, I'd be more than happy to connect. Thank you again, Dr. Ali.
Thank you so much. And thank you all the participants, and have a nice evening. I think most of the parts in India is the evening now. Okay, bye. Yeah. See you then next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.